So thank you everybody for joining our session. Thank you, good afternoon, and so let's start the session. Let's rest a little bit. And I would like to start this session by a quote, by quoting Stephanie Carline from Kieran Timberlake, which is one of the architectural agency from the US, who is really leading the fight against climate change. And she wrote an article in a very famous newspaper, American newspaper, a few months ago, and she said, "I have been polluting the planet for years. I'm not an oil executive, I'm an architect." I think the COVID act as a wake call, and we all realize our collective fragility. And at the same time, we realized that we were able to make radical and fast change. On climate change, the scientists are perfectly clear. We have 10 years to act. 10 years, it's basically in a political life, is less than 2 mandates for mayor. For a real estate company is 1 or 2 project life. So it's basically nothing. The real estate industry has clearly a key responsibility if it's not the main contributor in climate change. The numbers are speaking for themselves. Building, it's 40% of the GHG global emission. 30% for the operational use, so mostly energy, and 10% for the construction itself. And if we are following the predictions say, basically, it was before COVID, but let's be optimistic for the industry, but the predictions say it's approximately 1 billion new homes that needs and that will be built in by 2050. Let's stop there, 1 billion new homes. That's basically the size of a city like New York that we need to build every month until 2050. So however we build, the question is, seriously, is that sustainable? Can our planet sustain 1 billion, one new city like New York every month until 2050? I think the response is very clear if you speak from a human perspective. And the reality is that we know what we exactly need to do, what the real estate industry needs to do to change radically their way of doing. The first thing, and it's directly connected to the number I provide, the first thing is work on the existing stock. Work on the existing stock, I mean, invest massively in retrofit, and as well reuse as much as we can the existing building before thinking of demolition. The second thing is to reuse existing material and to administer used material. Buildings of today are resources of tomorrow, and we need to think that way. I really encourage you to have a look to what's happening these days in Amsterdam, for example, who they are really pushing the circular economy approach in the real estate, and it's very brilliant. The third thing is if really you need to build new, and that's really only the third thing, if really you need to build new, in that case you need to build for the future. That means build to last, build flexible, so there is no need of demolition if the use change, build efficient in resource, and build efficient in energy. And the fourth point is finally design to foster sustainable lifestyle. The real estate market, architects are not only building blocks, they are creating the way people live in city, and that's very important. So maybe just 2 concrete examples. In most of the city, there is a rule today to say having a parking in each building, having a number of parking in each building. Today we need to switch with cycling parking. Every building needs to include cycling parking. The same, there is a lot of information about how do we design to foster zero waste behavior for the people who will live there. And I encourage you to have a look what the American Institute of Architecture has done on that. So if we follow these four rules and we act fast and at scale, we may change, but we have only 10 years. So just to introduce our session now, after this very quick context, I would like to say, so we are going to have the session around two leading cities in the fight against climate change, Paris and Milan. They are both very involved in the C40 with the network involving more than 100 cities that are fighting climate change. And they are specifically very involved in the decarbonization of the built environment. During this session, the society will present their objective and their strategy to tackle climate change in the built environment. They will be accompanied by two famous French and Italian pioneer architects who will share with us how they are changing their practices in the wake of the climate emergency. So please let me introduce our speaker, and hopefully one of the speakers is going to join very, very soon. So the first speaker is going to be Pierfrancesco Maran, who is the deputy mayor of the city of Milan and is in charge of urban planning, green area, and agriculture, and urban agriculture. Marion, who is the advisor of Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, in charge of architecture, and she is as well an environmental philosopher. And Carlo Ratti, who should join us in the coming minutes, is the director of the MIT Sensible City Lab and the founding partner of Carlo Ratti Associati. And our last speaker is Jakob+MacFarlane, the founding director of Jakob+MacFarlane, and is as well a member of the Architect Declare movement, and is going probably to share with us a few information about that. Please let me start maybe with you, Pierfrancesco, and let me ask you the first question. So Milan is tackling climate change through a wide range of action. You are very well known as one of the most efficient low-emission zone, and you are a world leader in cutting the emissions from food production and food consumption. Please, can you tell us more about your policies and action to reduce emissions from building and from construction?
Thank you, Helene. The numbers you gave before, you gave us, they are important. The problem is big, and many cities, many countries are making many efforts, but we know that it wasn't sufficient. We had a plan, you remember that we made a good job on food policies. It was connected also with the World Exposition we hosted in 2015. Milan in 2010 was considered by TomTom Index one of the 5 most congestion cities in Europe. Now no more. We are at the middle level because we introduced a congestion charge. Last year we had a new pollution charge, a pollution area at the entrance of the city. We pushed for the sharing policies. We are building new subways, so we had a big clash with traffic. Of course, building is still a problem because it's so difficult to create a big plan when you have a system like in cities with many owners in the same building. That is partially part of the problem, at least in Italy. That gives the impression that it's easier to push on a new condition for new buildings. That is important because new buildings should be the best solution available on the market. But first, it's not sufficient that they have a good energy efficiency, but we have to implement other points. You were focusing on the fact that you have to reuse the new building. It's not always the same, and not always also for the last building we made, especially because nobody thought that there would be a crisis for offices. So, especially office buildings are thought to be just offices because you can't open window, you have the problem of escalators, etc. Now we have a new emergency because COVID changed the life of the cities, probably reduced the pollution and we created last year. That is partially a good news in a so bad 2020. But it responsibilizes citizens more than before. It's always a struggle to push for climate change and to convince citizens they have to participate, because it's not an easy win. For some, it's an opportunity. We see it on mobility. If we created new cycling lines and we made new cycling lanes, it's a good opportunity if you live not so far from your offices, but if you were used to get a car every day, of course it can be considered a limit. So you have to convince people that they need. And of course, even the investment needed for refurbish buildings, it's an opportunity, but you have to involve citizens. Now the national government made a fund where if you invest on energy efficiency, you will have 100% plus 10% more in 5 years. It's important, but it's not so easy in any case to obtain results, because you have to convince every person in the building that they have to vote for that, and it's the only thing that is more complicated than to have a vote in the city hall. So we are in a system that is changing every day. I think we have high goals. We know what is the direction. Now it's the most difficult part. We have to realize those plans. And it's incredible that, I don't know, but when it's directly responsibility of the public, actually you can realize plan, for example, on mobility. When you have to include, actually we have good results on new, but we have to push more and more on the old one. And then we have, last point, I want to focus. You said we need billions of new houses, yes. But for example, in Italy, we counted more or less 8 million of abandoned houses. Of course, they are not in the place where they are needed. But it's possible that, I'm sure that the cities will go up again after 1, 2, 3 years of problems connected with COVID. But I think that we are also rediscovering a sort of double identity for each other, where you have the city you work and maybe the city your grandparents were born, or the place for summer where you can be there again. And so we have the last point. If you don't have, if we have smart working and maybe you will go to work just 2 or 3 days a week, it's not excluded that you don't have to live 7 days a week in the city, but you can have 2 places. But you should find a way to use and to spend less for a place where you stay just 2-3 days. So not only the flexibility to move from housing to offices to production, but also the fact that even housing can be not just for the same person every day.
I think that's a very, very interesting point. Before thinking about building, we should already think about the vacancy rate. And the number in a city like Paris are crazy. And since the COVID, they are even more crazy. So that's really a new way of considering the question that we need to think. And as well, Dominique Alba from MIPIM was telling me, if you think of the Haussmann, how many buildings we are demolishing because they are not the good use. If you think about the Haussmann model can be changed so easily, but in the 50 past year, we have specialized so much our building that when we have a shock, as we are living today, it's totally complicated. We have all of these buildings who are empty, and reinventing them is going to be a big, big, big challenge. I would like now to ask a question to Marion. Thank you, Marion. So you have been on board in the city of Paris since already a long time, and in the past 6 years, Anne Hidalgo and Jean-Louis Misica has transformed probably like nobody before the Parisian real estate industry, raising the awareness of the industry on their responsibility to change and pushing them for more innovation and quality in this quite, let's be honest, conservative sector. So environment and climate change is the primary consideration of the city of this, for this mandate for the mayor. Please, could you give us an idea on how the city intends to accelerate decarbonization of the built environment in Paris?
Yes, so speaking about the crisis, I think it was really a very interesting urban experience because we were able to see in a few days what buildings were actually flexible and what buildings were not. It was just completely obvious. And for people and for mayors to see that most office buildings were completely empty during the crisis and that we were not able to do anything else in those buildings is simply not acceptable. Like, we cannot have all this stock of existing buildings that is not available for other uses. And in the contrary, we saw some very interesting uses. For example, hotels, which could become sometimes hospitals, or just the scale of the housing building in Paris, where people completely rediscovered, for example, the value of the courtyard. In Paris, a lot of people have a courtyard, but they don't use it. It's just the way where you cross every day and maybe you say hello to your neighbor. But this time they saw the value of this courtyard where you can do many things and where actually it could also become a garden. And some people started to make it a garden. And people also rediscovered the value, of course, of their neighborhood, of what we call the 15-minute city. What do you have 15 minutes from your home, and sometimes you go like 1 hour from your home while you have it very close. So that's very important because I think it was a good moment for everybody just to ask simple questions and like, what buildings do we want? What buildings are not acceptable in the city? And you said that the Haussmann model is actually very flexible, and it's true. I mean, you don't even ask the question when you have a Haussmann building in 10 years. It can be a space for a doctor, a housing unit, an office, and to see that in the real estate industry there has been a regression and not a progression on that matter is I think very it's a big question. Like, how could we become less flexible? So that's the big questions we have now. And in fact, as you said, we in the last mandate we organized those big competitions which were called Reinventing Paris, Reinventing Cities, and they were very helpful because it helped us questioning this industry and questioning the materials and everything we find in buildings. And I like this comparison between buildings and food very much because I think it's a very simple image to say that you want to know what's in actually what you eat, what are the ingredients. But for many people before, we were not interested in the ingredients of our buildings. Like, if you ask somebody what is actually inside, like where do the ingredients come from, nobody knows. It's crazy. Like, so we began asking those questions every time, and you get crazy answers because, for example, I don't know how many times I heard that it's not possible to build in wood or to build with stones. And it's just the way we built for thousands of years. So it's the same thing, like flexibility. You're like, okay, how were we able before, but not anymore today? And like, what's the problem there? And now the crisis, I think, really called an acceleration of how we plan the city. It helped us, of course, like Milan, like many other cities, do tactical urban planning, moving things faster, especially in terms of mobility. And Anne Hidalgo announced this morning that all the temporary bike lanes will be made definitive, and the Rue de Rivoli also will remain a street for bikes and taxis and buses, but no more individual cars. And I think that's very important also to say that now we know there is a climate emergency. We will not wait 6 years to do radical things because we just don't have the time. So now we have to go fast, of course, to keep a dialogue with the people. But in terms of mobility, in terms of real estate urban planning, we have to go faster, and we have, as you said, the priority is really to have a different look at our stock. I mean, Paris is a very dense city. We have so many millions of square meters that are underused, and so now it's really our priority. We look at our stock, and for every building, every municipal building, we start by those buildings because it's easiest for us. We think, okay, we have this school. What can we do in this school during weekends? What can we do in this school during evenings? And when you have a courtyard, it can become a garden. And when you have a school, it can become sometimes a shelter. Like, we really have to look differently at all our buildings because it's just an amazing stock. And I think the private sector should have the same look at their buildings. And when we build, but also after it's being built, it doesn't mean that we should not build anymore. Like, contrary to some other parties or other people, we still think that we have to build at some places in the city because it's necessary first for a social mix, because there are still a lot of people who want to access the city, and sometimes we have to build housing units for them because they cannot afford. And I think it's important to say, because it's always complicated between not in my backyard and ecological reasons. So we say that at some point you have to build, and also when there are places that need animation and need a bit of density. Like for example in Paris, it's all those places between Paris and the suburbs where sometimes it's completely empty, and it's places you don't want to go to have a walk, and sometimes in those spaces, it can be useful to build because you can create a new centrality, you can bring people, you can bring life. And so we're not saying we shouldn't build anymore, but we are saying that every square meter that is being built has to have a meaning. Like, it's not free to build, we are using a lot of matter. So every time we build, it is precious, and it has to have a social and an environmental impact. We cannot, we're not building for free, so. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Maybe a question for Brendan. For Brendan now. So, Brendan, you are the architect of two of the winning projects of the C40 Reinventing Cities competition, one in Paris-Saint-Denis and another one in Reykjavik in Iceland. Both projects aim for an ambitious net zero carbon objective in a whole life approach. That means considering not only the operational phase, which has been the case for a lot of years and is still the case for most of the thinking, but as well integrating the emission that came from the construction itself and the end of life. In both cases, you have developed very rigorous objective and strategy to decarbonize your project, putting the carbon impact at the core of the strategy and the decision-making process of your project. That was very interesting. Please, could you share with us a little bit about this expertise that you have developed through this competition and other projects?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear the discussion because you can tell, I mean, obviously I think for all the listeners too, you can tell that the thing is shifting very quickly. And I thought that was very interesting, this discussion on reusing existing and also recycling. And all of that's moved at an incredibly fast discussion, because we've had discussion groups like this in Oslo and Copenhagen. And it's very interesting just to see how fast things are moving, how exponential, and the subjects change, and they're becoming much more radical in their needs, and they're becoming more pushy. It's very interesting to hear about the city of Paris in terms of how it's moving up too, looking at all of its building stock, seeing what they can kind of quite radically do with it. So building on that sort of energy, you know, that speed on which the discussion is going, I would say the two projects. One is it would be interesting to then make the segue to, first of all, Paris. We had a site, or have a site in Paris in the Playel area, Saint-Denis area, very close to the Olympic Games, right on the border of the future Olympic Games for 24. And it's an old building that, in a sense, belonged to EDF. It was an old building to clean and repair huge industrial transformers for a vast site, which was basically a very polluting site of electricity generating for, we know in the 20s and 30s, a vast network of underground metro systems which demanded electricity in Paris. It was generated in this part of Paris. So there was a huge, to do that though, two resources we used, a lot of carbon and water. And one of them is heavily polluting. So we know within the site that we're on, it's already quite heavily polluted. The other thing that we know about the site, or we were given in a sense as a problem, was, so-called problem, was we had to keep an existing building. And, you know, it's known as the cathedral. It's a huge kind of heroic 1930s piece of sort of Art Deco, past Art Deco concrete architecture. It's an extraordinary building, and when we first looked at it, we fell in love with the idea of revealing the concrete, not filled with insulation in terms to bring the building back to life. And I think this is a huge, it's a big subject actually. As we say, we take on old buildings and we reuse them, and at the same time we've got a lot of contradictory laws which are coming into place about levels of insulation which are necessary to do that. So I think there is a fight that's developing there, and I think the Playel project is for us a kind of a precursor of that fight. It's a fight to say that it's an old building. You do not have to fill it with 60 centimeters of insulation to preserve an old building and to bring it back to life and make it available for people. You don't need it. What we did with our project is we have no insulation, and we have a thing called the plug, the energy plug, and it's a new piece. So it's very interesting, Marion, to hear about the necessity of new things at times. This is a new piece. It's called the energy plug. It is about bringing energy on a different levels, social as well as energy, back into an old building and changing the air temperature in that old building. So bringing the temperature to a constant throughout the year. By doing that, we have a glass house facing south, which produces food, and that can be sold in the restaurant, etc., downstairs. It's also a pedagogic glass house, so we bring in school children, people from around the area. So we make it available to associations, so we re-energize the associations. So it's one of these kind of projects which is trying to be win-win. It's trying to do good to the local environment, bring in energy as a resource from the sun, and then inject that into an old building. So we're trying to create a symbiotic relationship with an old existing piece of infrastructure. And we're not filling it with insulation to keep it alive. Therefore, we're not using, again, massively abusing resource to build. The big thing, I think, in the city of Paris in the future is to bring back those old buildings, but not to fill them with tons and tons and tons of building products in order to make them energy efficient. I think this idea of energy efficiency has to be absolutely looked at very carefully. What the issue is, we should start with ourselves, what temperatures we want to live with. Do we really want to live with, the temperatures we've been living with in the past 30 years? Or are we willing to reduce those temperatures down and accept also higher temperatures when they go up? And how do we do that? And we do know that we have a lot of capacity there with air exchange. Bringing air across a building has a huge impact on air movement, has a huge impact on this sense of what a temperature is that you can live with. And I think that's an issue. I would lead that on to the discussion on architects declare, because it's something that we're very interested in inside that group, is to how we maybe can also have a voice on, and we should have a voice on that legislation, which we'll be going through. So that's an issue. Anyway, that would be Pleyel. And then the other one is the, so we have a lot of issues. Of course, we're trying to, we have a lot of points to bring down the carbon. It's a wood project, so of course there's massive arguments on reducing the normal carbon impact on a building. Of course, as I mentioned, the solar energy. We're using energy systems that exist within the Pleyel site, which are wasted energies. We're plugging into those underground and using those within the building. It's the air recycling. It's the use of natural products. For example, you're well aware of the soil coming from the underground the Metro project, I should say, of the future. That soil being used as an insulating product for the building, which has been developed with Saint-Gobain and a bunch of other people. We have energy batteries for a lead generation on that, which will take the energy from that sun and reuse it over time within the building, so that we're a precursor with the building on that. So there's a lot developing towards the idea of the energy plug. And the other thing, the other project, of course, is the Reykjavik project, which on that we put a lot of emphasis on this issue of prefabricating the building off-site, so reducing massively the amount of energy on the building time and on-site, as well as using, it will be Iceland's largest wooden structure. And again, what we're using there is an interesting sheet wool on the inside, which is a natural product that has been used for years in Iceland, and we're using that as a local product to do on all the insulation for the building. We have a whole lot of energy systems. The thing there, we're aiming for close to net zero, and we can do that with Iceland because Iceland essentially has clean energy. Yeah. And it's an energy which comes as fantastic. Yeah. And it's like a bit like New Zealand. There's a lot of clean energy out there. New Zealand is hydro, tiny bit of volcanic. Iceland is volcanic.
The grid is already clean, so you don't have to put.
So we were lucky. We were lucky because we could plug into that clean energy grid, and therefore the carbon calculation, the net carbon calculation, could be reduced radically. So that was certainly a thing of luck on that. And therefore, the other thing that's very important with Iceland, like Pleyel, is we're going for a completely clean construction site. So that the machines on the site, for example, are not fossil fuel. It's all electricity. And then both of the projects, we have an overtime cycle, life cycle examination of the building over the years to see how all of these points, reducing carbon points, are actually playing out.
And I want to say just on this machine engine, I was discussing with the mayor of Reykjavik, who telling us that they want to use your experience to really see how they could create a market for these only electrical vehicle for construction site. And that's something they are. Yeah, please.
I was going to say something sorry, I was going to say something. Two or three things that come out of that was what was fantastic with the Icelandic people is they said they do not want any. We came with the developer and we said, would you like car parking? And of course, the Icelandic, the people of Iceland in this particular site said no car parking. Yeah. We want to force people living in this project, it's 25,000 meters squared of housing. We want to force them out of their car and into green mobility. And the building, so that was one point.
Zero
which was
car.
Fantastic. And so it's a building that sits on the landscape. So the whole issue of water, imprint of natural water going down into the land, we do it. We cover something like 30% of the site. It's really tiny. And the rest of the site is direct groundscape. So there's things like that are very, very interesting within the Iceland, politically what they're trying to push.
Thank you very much, Brendan. I have a second question for you, Pierfrancesco, just because we were discussing on the reinventing, and I have to say how Milan has been crazy successful on their reinventing cities model. I have to say thousands of people. The last meetup we organized, you had to open another room for online meeting, and it was before the COVID, because so many people, and I have the chance to see that the second competition, we organized it during the COVID, and we had this discussion, should we continue or not? And you decide to continue, and actually the project we are coming is even more ambitious. That I think something is happening as well in the real estate. So maybe you would like to, I would be interested to see how do you think this has impact the mindset of the Milanese and Italian industry?
Well, first we have to say that the model of reinventing is a very good idea, and it's important that it was not stopped in Paris where you thought there's this project, but many cities like Milan, we copied and implemented and adapted this idea to our needs. It was interesting because we were not used to ask also a project when we had to sell a building or a place, but our rules gave just the idea of money. While if we go on ideas, we can have a better project. We know what it will happen in this place, and so it's important. The reaction on the first edition was very good. We were not surprised because we hoped that it happened, but probably not that way. But we selected some small areas just to test the strategy. Then, to be true, 2019 for Milan was on the economical side probably the best year ever from decades. So we felt ready to try for bigger places. Now the world has changed, but we decided just to give 1 month more this spring to the groups, and we had many requests. And the judges said that also the quality was very good. So now we are in the second phase, and next spring we will have the winners. We hope they will arrive at the end. Of course, it's a tender where even somebody selected can jump and not go to conclude their work, but we are optimistic. And we think that even in this edition, we made some effort to improve, and we have also ideas for the future. For example, I think that now we are really focused on climate change, and we have to go on. Actually, we have to push even on the social side of the project. That it will be the next, if I imagine a third edition of Reinventing Cities, I don't know if we will do because we will have an election next May. I think that we will have to move from just, but it's not just, energy efficiency and climate change to the fact that it should push also a social change that is partially just visible in the project of this time.
Thank you. And I have to say, still one of the criteria, social benefit. But yeah, on.
We can
push it further. Marion, you maybe just one question on the retrofit, because we know that retrofit is a big topic. Pierfrancesco Maran was explaining how it was complicated to push that. Not just incentive or who can help, but it's difficult because when you have multi-owners and everything. At the same time, we are forced for 3 months people to stay home. We are all wearing masks and everything. So the question of what is complicated, what is possible seems to be a little bit re-questioned. So how a city of Paris, and we know that the courage is here, is thinking about that?
I think in real estate and architecture, it's also much a matter of what signals you send to the market and to the creative people. If I say, like, what I discovered with Reinventing Paris is really how you can put light on some sites that may not be like very attractive. They may not be in the best areas. They may not be like the best places. But if you if as a city like Paris, when you have this power because you're a big city and you can attract money and good ideas, if you know how to tell a story and how to bring the good people at the good moment, I think anything is possible in a way, and that's really my experience from those competitions. And I think we have to do that now with retrofitting. Like, you know, I often go to architecture juries, and we have a lot of juries for like social housing when we do ecological retrofitting. And every time we have like 10 architects who are competing, while on like new buildings we'll have 200 architect teams. And every time I wonder, like, why are the architects not interested in those competitions? And I think it's also our role as a city to make this topic and those competitions attractive. And we have to show that that we need creativity. Like, it's not just a technical issue. It's really also an issue about design, and it's also it's not just retrofitting a building. Like, you can do so many things when you retrofit. You can change the public space around. You can change the way you reuse water. You can change. You can bring, of course, green areas. You can change the way the building lives with all the neighbors. So I think we have to make it a more holistic issue, and to make it sexy in a way, so that people want to work about it, and so that we attract talents on that. So that's what we will do in this mandate, definitely, because we want creativity on that topic.
Very brilliant. So thank you. No, I think it's a very big topic. Brendan, maybe the last question for you, and maybe Carlo and Ratti one day. So, Architect Declare, maybe just explain us who they are, where it's come from, what you are doing.
Yeah, who they are is an English group that got together. They were Sterling Prize winners, but it was initiated really by a couple of people before that who were interested in biomimicry and in fact saw that in fact it wasn't working, this idea of getting the word out, the message out. So they wanted to actually attract the winners of a very prestigious prize, get them to talk, get them to form a group, and they did, and that was the origins of Architect Declare, which was only as late as 2019, so it's only last year. It's a very recent thing, but it's a phenomenon. And of course, when we went to Oslo, we immediately became interested in this idea, and we in Paris formed our own Architect Declare. Now you have about 200 groups of different engineers declare, etc. But from that you have it's a worldwide phenomenon now. Of our offices in France, we were six offices that put ourselves together to initiate it, and now we have over 500 signatories of groups of architects in France, which is fantastic. In England, we have close to 1,000. Because it becomes a kind of a worldwide phenomenon and therefore a network. So it's no longer a national boundary, and that's what's actually very, very exciting, and it's absolutely necessary. It has to be. It's a mondial, phenomenon, and so they have an 11-point agenda. We have an 11-point agenda, which is a lot of the points have been talked about today. Bringing things down, the aim of carbon zero, recycling, reuse of existing infrastructure, and it goes on. There's about an 11-point agenda which is put out, which is shared by that community. And then the idea is that those groups go off and help initiate within their own cultures other incentives. So there's a kind of connectivity, and also where we are our own group in France. And I think some of the things that we're very interested in right now is one of them is definitely the story that I was talking about the insulation legislation which is coming in there, which of course the government is behind initiating and getting all of those buildings insulated, but there's contradictions, and we want to make those very apparent to the political leaders about the abuse of resource that will come with that. So that's one example.
The whole-life approach, even for it.
Yeah, we just
not
can't.
Just for
absolutely, we cannot sit back and let that happen as architects. because as a political gender it looks very good, but in the reality, in the abuse of resources, massive. And so we need to be very, very clear about that. So that's one of the things we're putting among a lot of other things. They're going off in different directions.
Thank you very much. I think we are coming at the end. Thank you very much for being there. And thank you, Pierfrancesco, Marion, and Brendan. And that's just the beginning.